talking to the parents out there who do love their kids, trying to navigate away from how do I not allow my kid to fall into this childhood diabetes trap and this food trap.
We knew very well that obesity and diabetes was a result of excessive carbohydrate consumption, refined carbohydrates. Society did this, right? And unfortunately, in the 50s, there was an increase in death due to heart disease. Naturally, we're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I would understand if the powers that be said, hey, look, here's this study, right? It's the best we've ever done, and it gives us at least not an undeniable argument, but at least something to weigh our hats on. No advancement in literature came out. Right. Was that an entire plan from the inception? Was there a meeting between the medical society as well as food industry? Because what does that push us towards? Massive increase in consumption and processed carbohydrates.
We said, Dr. Jones, as a family, how do I fight that financial wall of eating healthy? And anything that's simply accomplished in the extracurricular field that I could implement in my daily lifestyle.
We now have this concern over organic versus inorganic, and that's a real thing. We focus on the dirty dozen and we say those ones are the ones that I have to buy organic. You could minimize your exposure and be as cost effective by
this is not us, right? No matter what, this isn't my family, right? I'm gonna do everything. I'm gonna make damn sure that's not my future, anyone I care about. How can anyone make sure that they don't become a part of these statistics?
I think it is being.
I wanted to show this to you today. It's Scott Galloway. He's a professor of marketing. He's a CEO, owns a bunch of companies, but he went viral last week for this video called Do We Love Our Children? And it's really about the economical shift that's impacting kids and what we can do about it. But so much of it, I feel, you can draw a lot of parallels from health and what's going on there to what he talks about. And I'd love to show it to you and get your thoughts on the other side of things.
Let's do it.
All right, man.
Do we love our children? Sounds like an illegitimate question, right? Well, I'm going to try and convince you otherwise. Essentially, as we go down generations, we're seeing that for the last 2 generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis. In addition, the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket. So the purchasing power, the prosperity is inversely correlated to age. Simply put, as we get younger, we're taking away opportunity and prosperity from our youngest. The social contract that is now no longer in place, and for the first time in the U.S.'s history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. This is a breakdown in the fundamental agreement we have with any society, and it creates rage and shame. As a result, people over the age of 55 feel pretty good about America, but less than 1 in 5 people under the age of 34 feel very good about America. This creates an incendiary. Righteous movements, cuts to our society end up becoming opportunistic infections because generally speaking, young people have a warranted envy, they're pissed off, and they're angry that they don't enjoy the same spoils and prosperity that were provided to our generation. This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident, it's purposeful. And we have found the ultimate strategy. It's called an LVMH strategy, where we artificially constrain supply to create aspiration and scarcity such that we can raise tuition faster than inflation. And old people and wealthy people have done the same thing with housing. All of a sudden, once you own a home, you become very concerned with traffic, and you make sure that there's no new housing permits. And here is a memo to my colleagues in higher ed. We're public servants, not Chanel bags.
I'm so glad someone has got the balls to say this.
The best example of this, they've increased their endowment in the last 40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%. Any university that doesn't grow their freshman class faster than population, that has over $1 billion in endowment, should lose their tax-free status because they're no longer in higher education, they're a hedge fund offering classes. All right, this all adds up to a bunch of graphs all headed up and to the right. And what are they? What's the first one? Oh, that's self-harm rates, which have exploded, especially among girls, since my colleague Jonathan Haidt pointed out it's really gone crazy since social went on mobile. What's the next one? Teens with depression. The next one, men and women not having sex. Biggest fear of my parents was that I was going to get in too much trouble. My biggest fear, honestly, is that my kids aren't going to get into enough trouble. By the way, my advice to every young person watching this program is go out, drink more, and make a series of bad decisions that might pay off.
Sarcastically,
Next
but
graph,
truthfully, right?
juvenile
Yeah.
gun
Like,
deaths. You're more likely to be shot in the United States if you're a toddler or an infant than a cop. Next graph, obesity, way up. By the way, the industrial food complex wants to addict you to fatty food so they can hand you over to the industrial diabetes complex. We should not romanticize obesity. You're not finding your truth, you're finding diabetes. Overdose deaths, way up. Deaths of despair. When I was in high school, it was drunk driving. Now it's kids killing themselves. Young people don't want to have kids anymore. 2/3 of people aged 30 to 34 able-bodied used to decide to have at least one child. It's been cut in half. It's now less than a third, 27%. If you acknowledge that our kids are the most important thing in our lives, that everything else we do here is meaningful, but our kids' well-being and prosperity is profound. If you acknowledge that they're doing more poorly than previous generations, if you believe there's a chance that the illusion of complexity has done nothing but provide cloud cover for the unbelievable transfer of goodwill, of well-being, and of prosperity from young to old, and if you believe we can actually fix these problems and we have the resources, then I present to you, I posit, I augur the question that I hope has more veracity than it did 17 minutes and 24 seconds ago. And that's the following question. Do we love our children?
wow.
So
There's so much to respond to that.
there's a lot there. Starting with the university piece, universities are there's a reinforcement structure because they get reimbursed by the government, and so they raise their tuition fees. Students go there, and say what you want, but I do know that the government isn't the most friendly with treatments that go outside of the pharmaceutical world.
Yeah.
Now you stack that with childhood obesity, something that those two words never even went together until the last 20, 25, 30 years maybe.
No.
And you see a rise of childhood obesity with inflation. And now when we have inflation, we go for the cheapest, most convenient foods. And where does that leave you? They talk about men and women having sex. We know hormones are going backwards, grip strength is
Oh,
going backwards, testosterone is going backwards.
plummeting right now.
It's not just that people want to have less kids because of the financial burden, but they have less of a drive to even want to have
They
kids.
they literally have less of a drive, less sperm production. So when they want to, they can't.
And this video obviously is hitting people with the right note because it's gone mega viral. And I wanted to take the opportunity to just, again, there are so many routes to go down, but what are your first thoughts when you see this?
Thank God that someone has the balls to speak up for the major problems that are in front of us. And, um, it's a catch-22, right? Because some people complain about America, right?
Mhm.
Land of the free, freedom of speech, but you really don't. And, you know, I'm careful with how I approach that and look at that, because you take a step back and look at the rest of the world and you go, okay, so we still have it way better here. I'm not complaining,
Mhm.
but when it is fair to really question freedom of speech
Mhm.
and the rights that our forefathers fought really hard to develop and lay down for us, that we did have at one point, that big business has came in and dented with their massive footprint, I
Mhm.
guess is an interesting way to express it. And so um, I think we need to talk about it. I think um, where I was going with that is people are scared.
Yeah.
People are afraid. There's a great deal of suppression that exists, and it takes a lot of cojones to just make that video. And there's a reason why it's going viral, because more people need to step up and stand up
Mhm.
and put a foot down and ground it and spread awareness. So because the problems will never begin to reach a resolution without the initial recognition that there's a problem to begin with. I mean, isn't that the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a problem.
Yeah. So then what are your thoughts? You see kind of a simultaneous linear trajectory with diabetes, with obesity, and with depression. And I don't think that's by chance. And as you know, I'm about to be a new father, and I do still have two stepkids, which I love very much. And I find myself having thoughts that prior to 3 years ago I never had, and I care about what my kids eat, and I care about what they're going to be exposed to when they go off to college, and I care about even now when they come back from elementary school. Some of the things on that list are just, they blow my mind, really. And so talking to the parents out there who do love their kids, trying to navigate away from, how do I not allow my kid to fall into this childhood diabetes trap, and this food trap.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Because as you've stated, and I've made so much content regarding this, right? Like childhood obesity and diabetes wasn't a problem, prior to 50 years ago. And,
Hmm.
it really boils down to the big, in my opinion, there's many pieces to this, but the biggest piece was the big shift in our dietary consumption, like our understanding of what's good food and what's not. And, prior to the 1950s, a lot of people don't even know this, but prior to the 50s, we knew very well for at least a century that obesity and diabetes was a result of excessive carbohydrate consumption,
Hmm.
refined carbohydrates. We knew eat less carbohydrates, eat less refined processed foods, and you'll handle diabetes and obesity. This was in the medical literature. This was in physiology and health textbooks. Great
Hmm.
health educators at the time knew this. Society knew this, right? And unfortunately, in the 50s, there was a big increase in death due to heart disease. And naturally, we're trying to figure out what the hell's going on, right?
Hmm.
This is, and there we didn't realize at the time, like, hey, we're having better public health measures, advancements in antibiotic medicine, advancements in vaccinations. Also, there was
Less infections, less acute deaths. Yes, yes.
exactly an increase in smoking too as well,
Hmm.
right? So we didn't look at these other factors. We just saw, oh my gosh, this is a problem, increased death to heart disease. And there was this idea, which is very faulty, that it was due to excessive cholesterol and saturated fat consumption, which we've already proven that's not the case.
Hmm.
Many people, many people can have a healthy heart with consumption of a diet that has cholesterol, that has saturated fat, and we can go on and on
Yeah.
and on about that. So we finally hit a point because this argument ensued between the 50s and 70s, and the government came in the 70s and made a decision for us. And what's so crazy about this is a monumental time in 1977. I would understand if the powers that be said, hey, look, here's this study, right? It's the
Hmm.
best we've ever done, and it gives us at least not an undeniable argument, but at least something to weigh our hats on. No advancement in literature came out.
Right.
Big Brother stepped in and said, this is what's going to happen. We say saturated fat and cholesterol is the enemy. So therefore, we need to change our dietary approaches. We need to make a massive shift and reduce our consumption of fat, saturated fat specifically, but overall fat, reduce our consumption of cholesterol. So we only have three macronutrients. There's only three sources of carbohydrates, or three sources of calories. Fat being the big portion of it, because there's 9 calories per gram,
Hmm.
and then you have protein and carbohydrates. So if you make a shift and tell everybody they got to eat less fat, well, you can only need so much protein,
Hmm.
and plus that's expensive too. And so that leaves carbohydrates. And you know, again, I'm glad they point this out, right? Like, was that an entire plan from the inception? Was there a meeting between the medical society as well as food industry? Because what does that leave us to? What does that push us towards?
Hmm.
Massive increase in consumption and processed carbohydrates.
Right.
And we can literally point that the rate of increase in obesity, because we were having a slight steady increase in obesity, which I would expect with just from the 1900s with advancements in technology and all that. But
In 77.
all the way up in
Right.
1977, you can pinpoint a massive increase in this incidence rates of obesity, and it's a little bit gotten better at points in the last 15
Hmm.
years, but then it got worse again. So, and then diabetes followed.
And that was the food pyramid with bread as the base, correct?
Yeah, well, right after that, that's where we didn't have the food pyramid where carbohydrates were the
Right.
base until after this.
Now, back then, were they differentiating like medium chain triglycerides? Were they separating those, or were all saturated fats at the time just being categorized as?
Yeah, we did not have an understanding of
Yeah.
different categorizations of fat beyond just saturated versus unsaturated.
Right.
now we understand more in depth different types of saturated fats, like you said, medium chain triglycerides, which we can find in coconut oil. MCT oil is just a derivative of coconut oil. But outside of that, no, it was pretty black and white in terms of we got to reduce overall saturated, but just overall fat consumption, and that shifted us towards higher consumption of processed carbohydrates, which to me is one of the main reasons why diabetes and obesity is running wild, and why those statistics, and there's so much I hope that you're going to bring up that we don't want to get into, why the graphs are off the charts. It's crazy right now how declining the whole overall consensus is. It's not moving in the right direction, as you said.
Okay, so let's give parents some ammunition here. There's the financial piece. So let's say we said, Dr. Jones, as a family, how can we eat healthy? What can we do? And any peripherals, any extracurriculars, whether it's supplementation, a little bit of activity, understanding I'm a normal American with an incredibly busy life. So 2 questions. How do I fight that financial wall of eating healthy? And anything that's simply accomplished in the extracurricular field that I could implement in my daily lifestyle.
Yeah. So, and I realize I never actually answered your first question, so I'm glad you asked me again. I kind of wanted to get that. I wanted to get that base understanding first. So yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to just fruits and vegetables, for example, right? So nobody's arguing that, well, let me take a step back. There are people that think excessive consumption of fruit can be a problem. Me personally, a very obese, very insulin resistant person, if they are eating excessive amounts of fruit, yes, that can be problematic. But I'm very careful to ever place a blame on fruit or even high consumptions of fruit, because I think there are so many other lower hanging fruits, no pun intended, of things that we can focus on. So when it comes, so my point being that increasing our consumption of fruits, increasing our consumption of vegetables are a stable and a movement in the right direction. But with increasing cost, this is where it becomes problematic. We now have this concern over organic versus inorganic, and that's a real thing. Like, anybody that doesn't believe that there is concern over consuming non-organic produce, then my best advice to you is begin to do some research and dig into the literature. Glyphosate alone, the company Roundup is involved in multiple class action lawsuits, and it's already been proven how deleterious the effect towards our health for that particular pesticide. But there's so much more. So the overall agricultural industry, when it comes specifically with the production of produce, we have to use pesticides, right? We don't have any other technology to get rid of insects which destroy crops. So the problem is, with enough time and exposure to pesticides,
tolerance, and
insects develop tolerance, they evolve. And so now the efficiency, the effectiveness of those pesticides begin to decrease.
Which we then have to evolve.
So then without putting much thought into it, or maybe they did, this is where go down the conspiracy rabbit hole here, but their reaction was, well, let's make pesticides stronger. And that's the game that we're in right now, is pesticide resistance is developing in insects, which is leading to stronger pesticides. And unfortunately, humans are feeling the effect of it with so pesticide exposure is one of the main, not probably it's hard to say which one is the main one, but it's one of the top 5, top 8, in my opinion, classes of toxic exposure, where we call this endocrine disrupting chemicals. And that's leading to a whole cascade of issues. But and we definitely I want to go down that, but bringing it back to the produce, in an effort to save money, there is a list called the Dirty Dozen. And the Dirty Dozen is a research-based list where it is these particular produce in which, if we want to minimize our exposure to pesticides, we focus on the Dirty Dozen, and it is those 12 fruits and vegetables that you should absolutely buy organic. Because, and hence the name Dirty Dozen, they absorb the most amount of pesticides. Then we move away from the Dirty Dozen. There's also this other list called the Clean 12, which is kind of the opposite of it. And that's kind of nice to know. It's literally the opposite of it, the produce that has the least amount of absorption. But if we focus on the Dirty Dozen and we say those ones are the ones that I have to buy organic, you could minimize your exposure and be as cost effective by purchasing the rest in a non-organic fashion, because yes, that will save you a ton of money. Organic produce sometimes is 2-3 times the price, and they're not as modified at times, and so you're getting less for, unfortunately, 2 or 3 times the price. So a lot of families unfortunately don't have the ability to afford that. And look, if you're in that boat where you're not even consuming fruits and vegetables at all because of the price, right? Well, that's a whole other conversation, right? And I think that first, talking to the category of people that are looking at produce, don't freak out and think that, in my opinion, that because you can't afford to have anything organic, including even the 12th, I would still get your fruits and vegetables. I think at this point, I'm not convinced otherwise that you should avoid it. The exception being maybe a particular autoimmune disease or inflammatory condition where you notice consumption of certain foods. Certain fruits and vegetables are creating problems, fine. But as a generalization, getting fruits and vegetables in, even if they're all non-organic, I think is still important enough to do. Then the next tier would be, okay, the dirty dozen, I'm going to get those organic. Then the next tier, if you can afford it, would be getting all organic, right? So we just have to work within the means of our budget and do the best that we can. And I think that's a good starting point, and that's a good sort of frame of reference.
Okay. My favorite book on diet is, I think I mentioned it once before. It's What the Heck Should I Eat? Dr. Mike Hyman, circa 2016. He really opened my eyes to dairy and eggs. And you know me, I'm frugal and I love saving money. And I really do believe if I'm talking to someone and I say, listen, if you had to pick something to be organic, dairy and eggs, will you expand, especially on the egg piece, the higher omega-3s, higher anti-inflammatory, more heart and joint and brain healthy? Because it does make a huge impact, I think, on your daily health for people who are consuming eggs consistently to, if you can, make that extra budgetary allowance and go ahead and get organic.
Yeah. So, the egg industry, like many industries, is trying to reduce their bottom lines and improve their profit lines. So, there has been a big shift in the nutritional value of eggs. So if we're talking about the highest level free range organic eggs, we are looking at eggs that have the highest amount of essential fatty acids, the highest amount of certain, in particular, EPA and DHA content. Those essential fatty acids are the building blocks of cell membranes, because our cells have this phospholipid membrane, essentially made up of fat. And so particular type of fat, we find these and we call them essential fatty acids. So the human body cannot make these. We will die over a certain period of time with being deprived of consuming these EPAs, which is why supplementing with EPAs is just, to me, non-negotiable.
Right.
But there's still something to be said of like a supplement as being a short-term solution, not a long-term solution, meaning getting as much essential fatty acids from food as you possibly can. And eggs don't just stop there with essential fatty acids. The B vitamin profile is very, very rich, very, very rich in riboflavin, very, very rich in biotin. These are essential B vitamins that are very, very powerful for just driving many enzymatic processes. We have vitamins, we have minerals. The B vitamin complexes are huge. And so, again, you should be supplementing with this, but getting them from your eggs too as well is very, very important, and a much more higher amount of bioavailable protein too as well. So eggs have high amount of protein, high amount of fat, high amount of nutrition. The satiety of eggs are very, very high. Truthfully, I mean, I can go on and on about the benefits of eggs. And so we really want to focus on getting the highest quality when possible, and incorporating them into your diet.
And do you drink milk? Not almond milk, I mean, like, do you drink cow's milk?
Hell no.
Why?
Oh man, I mean, I can relate to being a kid and just remembering how delicious milk tastes. I mean, I'm not averse to the taste of it, but I think I think I've just hit a point where I've lost faith in the dairy industry and the quality of the milk that's coming. If I had access to raw milk, if I had access to a dairy farm, I absolutely would do that.
Hmm.
I haven't gone out of my way. I know there's certain places and certain, so I haven't. I think goat milk is great. I do think you have a better chance to avoid some of the
Hmm.
deleterious effects that you're going to get with cow's milk. But in any case, I'm like, what purpose does it serve me, right?
Hmm.
And so almond milk for me gets the job done. When do I drink almond milk? It's a base for my protein shakes. And if I am eating breakfast, which is pretty rare, sometimes on the weekends because I live a lifestyle of intermittent fasting, then just having that kind of
Hmm.
that flavor profile works for me. Also, some of these higher quality cereals that I do, using almond milk for that. So
Hmm.
that completely to me suits my needs, and I stay away from dairy because I'm already going to get as much dairy from cheese,
Hmm.
and cheese is part of my diet. Unfortunately, for the people out there that are lactose intolerant, you're going to have to find solutions. You're not going to get dairy. You're not going to get cheese, and there is no. I'm sorry, there is no dairy-free cheese that tastes as good, but there are some reasonable substitutions. So but yeah, I think more people will
Hmm.
benefit by abstaining from the consumption of milk, and the calories are very high too as well. And we all can benefit from eating less calories.
Yeah.
So
And one more question on this topic. You mentioned endocrine disruptors. Hold on to those thoughts because that graph about adults having sex, those tie in. We know that already.
oh my gosh.
But this is just so helpful for people listening because they need these true applicable pieces of data. I just get these questions way too often. For your meals, right? Uh, Shopping, Trader Joe's, Costco, wherever you're going, what are those items that you're buying to secure yourself throughout the week that aren't breaking the bank?
Yeah, so um, I will find myself recommending to patients a Costco run and buying as much of the big bags of meat that they have, specifically chicken thighs, chicken breast. You can get a really, really, Costco is the place to go. I mean,
Yeah.
I think for value, that is going to be the place that you're going to stock it up on your meat there, stock it up on your eggs. And now they have produce. And so I just try to buy in bulk as much as you possibly can from
Hmm.
places like Costco, and then supplementing from the smaller grocery stores, intermediately when you need something quicker because Costco takes some time, right? So I think a lot of people would benefit from scheduling a weekly Costco run,
Hmm.
so they know what's on the schedule. They know that they can go there and they can stock up on things, or at least every 2 weeks. You can make Costco work, depending on, I guess, size of the family is probably one variable, and how much financial backing you have to invest in your produce.
Okay.
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt for a quick minute. If you are looking for a free guide where I break down step by step how to implement prolonged and longer fasting successfully, I'll link to it in the show notes where you can get a free copy. Now, back to the show.
And then lastly, peripherals. So anything else that a family can be doing that's easy that, a 13-year-old would have to be willing to subscribe to this, right? That the parents have to convince them. So whether it's a loose form of intermittent fasting for the family, any type of supplements, any workout advice for anyone who has kids who just aren't active at all, maybe something they could just jump into that would be slightly enjoyable, that wouldn't require a one-on-one personal trainer, anything like that.
Yeah, I think the two most powerful lifestyle interventions
Hmm.
that are, most people will not need a coach necessarily to implement would be what we just finished talking about, reducing your consumption of processed foods, right? So we've kind of covered that a little bit,
Hmm.
incorporating more produce, incorporating more meat, incorporating fruits and vegetables, right? As you do that, you decrease your consumption of processed food. So
And
that,
probably save money too.
and you're going to save money. I mean, it depends though.
Depending.
It depends, right?
Right.
Because processed food is cheap. So the money thing, don't make that a goal because you probably will end up spending more. I think, especially when you start going more towards organic, but the uh, first pillar is reducing consumption of processed foods. You don't need to go 100% process free. That's difficult.
I think well, let me rephrase that. I think there's three tiers. I would say the most expensive tier is I eat out fast food all the time. The second most expensive is I eat mainly organic, but it's all groceries. And then the cheapest tier is all processed, but I grocery shop. So when I was saying you save money, I mean compared to the fast food visits.
Eating out.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah. So technically speaking, okay. So that's a whole lot, you introduce a whole other
Right.
category, and that's a good point. A lot of people are eating out. So absolutely, when you're eating out, not only are you not getting organic, but you're paying an insanely high premium.
Mhm.
And truthfully, for me, that's where my 20% comes in, because I do love going out. There's some ambiance. It's date night. I do every Saturday night with my girlfriend. We're going trying out new restaurants, but that's usually it. Maybe one more time, right? The rest of it, we're planning healthy, nutritious meals. So absolutely, if you're doing that a lot, that's a huge savings right there. So good point. I'm glad you actually clarified that. And then within the category of the non-restaurants, right? That's where you allocate how much funds you can towards organic when you can, and just getting out of the class of processed foods. So that cardinal rule, the less processed food you eat, the healthier you will be. Like no one's arguing. Okay. The second most powerful lifestyle intervention, hands down, would be fasting. I put that above resistance training.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, you're asking me what's going to be the most effective for the most amount of people.
Right.
Well, the most amount of people are fat. The most amount of people are overweight, are obese, are insulin resistant, are inflamed, and giving their bodies opportunities to lower insulin levels, right? Unfortunately, sometimes the first fast won't even lower insulin levels because their insulin levels are elevated because they have a condition called insulin resistance. But not adding to the fire, right? Because when we eat, we release insulin. So the first step towards healing is stop adding more insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the best way to stop adding insulin is to refrain from eating. So fasting is the most powerful intervention. It's tied with reducing consumption of processed foods, but it's more controversial. That's where the controversy exists. That's where the argument exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it safe? The fact that people are even questioning the safety of fasting, to me, just blows my mind. I mean, this is what we did for 3 million years. Human beings for 3 million years had to fast, consistently inconsistent, right? Through these periods of times where they didn't know they were going to secure their next meal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was through millions of years where human beings developed really awesome systems within their body to consume, when they do have meals, consume large amounts, excessive amounts of calories, store that extra energy in the form of body fat, which, if you think about body fat, as much as we demonize it and hate it, back in those days, it was like liquid gold,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because this here was a tissue in your body that was metabolically inactive, did not require that much calories like your muscle mass requires a lot of energy, and energy is like gold back in that day. So now you have fat, which is a literal storage, doesn't require that many calories to sustain itself, and is a storage of energy, right? So the fact that you
Mm-hmm.
could do that, right? Nobody was obese at that time, right? Because we didn't get to that point, but that's what body fat is supposed to do. So that when you are not eating, your body just switches out of that carbohydrate burning mode and gets into the fat burning mode where it's producing ketone bodies. And, we can go on, and we have already. So fasting is a way to tap into our ancestral roots. Fasting will reduce inflammation. Fasting will improve insulin sensitivity, aka reduce insulin resistance. Fasting will make a person more metabolically flexible,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the three things that are going to be the recipe for lasting weight loss, and the recipe for improved metabolic health, which ultimately means improved levels of health. And I want to be clear, so we're not going to go too far down this, but intermittent fasting is a great start. But for the majority of people out there, intermittently fasting, taking your daily approach towards eating and compressing that to 8 hours, is a great start.
Mm-hmm.
It is far from enough for most people. For doing this on myself for the past 25 years, and more importantly, working with patients in a clinical setting for the past 12 years, where we do, functional health, where we are looking at lab values, stool analysis, and really taking a deep dive into a person's overall health. I can tell you that the patients who really embodied the fasting protocols that I laid out for them, the ones that really dove in head first and implemented this lifestyle where I would have them fasting every single week, one long fast. So instead of a daily short fast, we are looking at a weekly, one time per week, long fast. And we get our patients into 36, 48 hours every single week. And, again, handling those aspects that lead to obesity, to insulin resistance, that make it difficult for people to maintain weight loss, which I've always called weight maintenance resistance.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the most powerful intervention, up there with a diet that is much less in processed foods. Those two things right there, if you just did that, I think that would solve obesity for a lot of people.
That's perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for. Here's the second part. Men and women, for whatever reason, aren't having sex anymore. We have a much higher rate of teen depression and a much higher rate of self-harm rates and general depression within the entire population. Now, I've seen some really interesting data, one on what happens when someone who has suboptimal hormone levels is then treated. And if they're on Zoloft, Lexapro, multiple SSRIs, there's a huge percentage of individuals who are able to titrate either to a lower dose or off the medication completely. I've seen studies with testosterone and neurodegeneration, cancer, diabetes, neuropathy, osteoporosis, all in the prevention category, mind you. Um, Sleep, the list goes on and on and on. And when you talk to people about just the stats of endocrine function and what's happening, they have no clue about the levels, how much they're dropping, how that's affecting us on a day to day. Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, even that category alone, I mean, where do I even begin? So,
Disruptors, I would say.
yeah, so endocrine disrupting chemicals are a class of chemicals that are disrupting our endocrine system's ability to produce our hormones. So the endocrine system is our system of glands, and those glands are what produces hormones. Hormones are powerful chemical signalers, messengers. For example, the testes release testosterone, and testosterone is not the most potent male hormone, but it is the one that sort of is the one that we talk about as we should. It's the base, and then it becomes basically every other hormone that we need as far as developing these masculine tendencies, the muscle building, the fat loss, the feel good, the confidence, the energy, the motivation. I was careful to not make any gender specific cues, not only because of where things are at nowadays with that, but literally, even aside from that, women need testosterone too. So besides penile function, right, all the other things that we're talking about with mental health and energy and motivation, and the way the body responds with muscle development or lack thereof, women are subject to these, and it is the effect of testosterone that makes this a possibility. So when we look at these massive decreases, so let's start with testosterone, because since we're talking about this, the reference ranges have plummeted. So when you look at your lab, the reference range is the range next to the particular lab. And what's crazy about these reference ranges is the way we use them, the way doctors and people look at them is, okay, great, that's the range that I'm supposed to be in. Oh no, I'm a little high, oh no, I'm a little bit low. That's a problem, right? And the doctor will tell you, we got to work on that, right? So we're using that range as if that is an actual representation of what I should be at. But that's not how they calculate those numbers. The way they calculated those numbers is off of a standard deviation. So they took you as an individual, for example, and they said, okay, where does John compare to all the other men that are in their late 30s that are what is
Mid, mid.
Okay, so we'll be clear. Mid 30s, we'll compare him to all the other mid 30s men. And how does he compare to them? Is he in the middle? Is he above? Is he low? Right? So, look, there's a reason why they do this. It's much easier to calculate this. It'd be too expensive to calculate the other. So I don't have a problem with doing that. But when we forget that that's what we're actually looking at, and we are noticing testosterone levels plummeting, right? We have about half of the amount of testosterone that we used to have 50 years ago. So the reference ranges are plummeting. They used to go up to 1,000 in that range, give or take, total testosterone. Now they go up to 600-700, depending on which lab you're looking at. Low testosterone level, same thing, because the entire range has plummeted, depending on which range. The bottom of the range now is about 280, 290. Good luck having a functioning penis with a testosterone level below 300. I mean, it is very, very difficult. We've been balancing hormones with patients, men and women for the past 10 years. And so usually once we hit the 300 or lower, that's when penile function begins to go. But well above, because that's like the last thing. That is like the last thing. So optimal man, where he feels his best, is somewhere between 700 and on, right? So when we have men that are lower than 700, that's when and as that level starts dropping, that's where we start to notice an onset of all these symptoms, right? We start going down. So on that optimal range, we notice better protections and this is huge. I mean, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's we know are flat out higher the lower your testosterone is. So you have a protective effect of higher level of testosterone. So that's not even necessarily a symptom thing. That's just a knowingness that you're less likely to get a horrible debilitating disease by having an optimal level of testosterone. As that range begins to drop, then we notice increases in anxiety, increases in depression, less responsiveness to your workouts, development of body fat, specifically belly fat, motivation decreases, sex drive decreases, confidence decreases, quality of life decreases. My penis might still work, but and then finally you get to a point where if it drops low enough, that even penile function
but like 230s, 220s, somewhere around there, right?
So yeah. I mean, I've noticed men with it's a range for every person, but even 300 had starting to really go down. So this is this is a huge problem that no one's talking about. Unfortunately, not enough people are talking about it. But this is the same reason why sperm production is decreasing at a massive rate. Infertility is skyrocketing right now because sperm levels are at the lowest we've ever seen them. And sperm production is a byproduct of many of those androgen hormones like testosterone. So it makes perfect sense. If testosterone levels are plummeting, so is sperm production. Sperm production is plummeting. And so quality of life decreases. So when we look at just that chart alone, talking about sex life, I mean, there's so many factors that go into sex, right? There's obviously the dichotomy between the relationship of the partners and where that stands. But it don't matter how great that relationship is. If one partner doesn't have a drive to have sex, good luck, right? And how many relationships have you thought about where, for the sake of the relationship, women, we tend to think of this more, right? The woman is forcing herself to have sex for the sake of saving the marriage, right? And it's how sad is that, right? How sad is that? That usually doesn't last. And we're at the point now where we understand, I think, on at least where science needs to focus on is and research more, but I don't think anybody's not looking at these chemicals. I don't think there's we don't know what's really causing this. No, we know it's endocrine disrupting chemicals, and these chemicals we're not going to be able to cover them all, but BPAs is a huge one. Phthalates is a big one.
Dirty electricity.
EMF and dirty electricity. It's house exposure from our household products, the chemicals we've already talked about, pesticides. They're in the solvents and the products, the plastics. I mean, it's literally impossible. You should do your best to know, you shouldn't have plastic. You shouldn't sleep with your cell phone on. You should put it on airplane mode. You should never have a Wi-Fi router in your bedroom. And look, I'm not waiting for randomized control studies to tell me, yes, Wi-Fi routers are dangerous in your house.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do it. And I don't recommend my patients ever do it. I would rather find out 10 years later that I was wrong and it was safe than I was right and I didn't do it. Right. Like that to me is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And so regardless of putting your best foot forward, and we all should, to avoid these toxic chemicals, you're not going to be able to avoid them.
Yeah.
And some of these chemicals they're looking at have a lifetime, that because their breakdown is so slow. Like the perfluoroalkyl substances will stay in our body for our entire life. And now they have studies. I mean, this blows my mind. Even mother's exposure when she's
To
pregnant
the children.
can cause now, and they're seeing this, a lifetime of lower endocrine function from the baby. So it's very, very scary. The potential for population collapse, the
Mm-hmm.
potential for quality of life. And as more and more of these symptoms start, they find another drug, another pharmaceutical agent to be the remedy for this, instead of talking about hormone therapy. And
Yeah,
we can
there you
go,
go.
yeah, that band-aid effect. And yeah, I mean, I know we have other episodes coming up
Mm-hmm.
where we're going to talk about testosterone and all that. So, but I mean, yeah, I think this is why, he's pointing out in this TED talk why sex is just not happening anymore, and we know
Yeah.
what that does to quality of life.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about men, but women, if I grossly underestimate, at least 500 women in the last few years have told me, I went to my doctor, my OBG, my primary care. I got that symptom survey, and, it was weight gain, check. Painful intercourse, check. Intolerance to cold, check. Anxiety, check. Depression, check. Can't sleep, check, 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 check. Did my labs, my doctor said, you know what? You're in range. Let's just make sure you eat better and then try to work out and get some sleep. Right? I mean, I feel like there was a point in my life when I was hearing that on a literal daily basis. And the insanity in that, one, because if your body is presenting symptoms, something is going on by nature. That's how that works. But two, that a doctor can be so dismissive. And three, that a patient can be left so isolated and stuck. Right? So men get all this attention, but we have all these women who are severely lower than they need to be with no help. So what's the solution, or what's the recommendation from you to them?
Yeah, I mean, they're literally made to think that they're crazy,
Mm-hmm.
right? The solution is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, but just to really highlight women, and I know we only have about 10 minutes left. So in addition so men and women are both subject to this overall increasing exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals,
Right.
which is ravaging our hormone production, our sex hormone production. And both women and men are feeling the effects of lower testosterone and just overall lower hormone function. But women specifically now have this already more difficult time in their life called menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And so menopause is the point in a woman's life where they are no longer ovulating, right? And menopause is such an interesting thing because most animals die. The female dies after menopause. There is no menopause. That just means no longer can I give birth. My existence ceases to mean. I mean, I don't want to get into the philosophy of it. They found a handful of animals that do have this postmenopausal thing. So it's interesting, right? So there's a lot to learn there. But for humans, we live, right? Women exist, but oh my God, the symptoms that happen with menopause. And what's crazy is before the 90s, right? Here's another example of a quote unquote study that came out and some decisions were made that just screwed, in this case, women over. So the Women's Health Initiative trial came out in the 90s. We knew before the 90s, from the 70s to 90s, it was pretty unequivocal standard thought. You give a woman estrogen, and you have to balance it out with progesterone. That's very, very important. So the lining of the uterus doesn't get too thick, and that could lead to cancer. But as long as you're giving a good ratio of progesterone to balance out the estrogen, and you can determine the needs of estrogen based off symptoms and FSH levels, which is follicular stimulating hormone, which leads to the production of estrogen. They did great. Menopausal symptoms were at bay. But this Women's Health Initiative trial came out, And I won't go too in depth. We're going to have to save that as well. I know we're going to be talking about hormones later, but basically a couple things resulted from that study. But the biggest thing that came out of that study was this idea that hormone therapy is dangerous for women, that it causes cancer. And in this study, it did. But they didn't include bioidentical natural hormone therapy. So for the listeners out there, bioidentical hormones mean, because they're all synthetic, right? They didn't, endogenous means from within the body, exogenous means from external. So they're all synthetic, but they're the bioidentical ones are synthetically made to be biologically identical. So if you look at them under a microscope, identical to the ones to our body, as opposed to the famous, and infamous at this point, Prem-Pro and Premarin, which are synthetic estrogen and progesterones. Which,
just a side note, you really quick, Premarin, pregnant, male, urine. It's literally where the name comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes from horse urine.
Yep.
And so these medications will act on the receptors, but they're very unidentical, and cause a whole set of side effects and ultimately cancer. So the study even had to be stopped because of how dangerous they found. But it's just wild to me that if we knew, and we have been using bioidenticals, at least some people in the population, why they wouldn't include it. And there's so many more problems, by the way, in the study. And again, we're going to have to save the in-depthness of this for later. But they studied women 10 years after menopause. They studied a very unhealthy population. They looked at asymptomatic women instead of symptomatic. I mean, the list of errors in this study, but are endless. But to quote one of my one of the individual doctors that I follow, Dr. Peter Attia, I'll just quote him. He says this might be the biggest instance of outright flagrant, his exact words were, where they screwed up. And unfortunately, millions, if not billions of women paid the price, because after that, all hormone therapy stopped. Doctors used to literally be trained in hormone therapy for men and women. And at that point, they stopped. And so doctors stopped getting training. How are they ever going to be able to talk about this idea if it's not even part of their training? So all those symptoms. And what's crazy is their menopausal symptoms, that list is growing. Yeah, now they recognize that bipolar, literally bipolar disease, can be a simple symptom of menopause, which menopause is that natural point of decrease in hormone production. So we already have this fact where endocrine disruptors are ravaging everybody. And now you have menopause, which is already supposed to be a point where there is a natural decline. And the combination of both is, women have had to suffer. And now finally, I would say it's still far from standard for sure. There's still so much controversy. There's still so much confusion. But like when you ask me, what do women and men do? Hormone therapy is one of the first things that I would consider, in addition to cleaning up your lifestyle, avoiding these toxic things as much as you possibly can, reducing consumption of processed foods, incorporating fasting, and then, I can go on and on about other things like optimizing stress, optimizing sleep, resistance training, supplements, but we were just focusing on the most important ones, and I would say starting there is big.
Okay. I know that your goal is to help at least 1 million people. You're going to change their lives, help them lose weight, maintain it. And I think at this point, that's probably a really low bar. It's going to have to be up pretty soon.
Yeah, I wanted to start with 1 million because that's just a good number.
Yeah.
And hopefully I can figure out how to expand from there.
At this point, I think that's a low number, but understanding that everyone does love their children, they do love themselves. And these graphs, this data that we looked at, doesn't make the future look so bright. What would be understanding that this is not us, right? No matter what, this isn't my family, right? I'm gonna do everything. I'm gonna make damn sure that's not my future, anyone I care about. How can the listeners do the same? Another way to ask it is, how can anyone make sure that they don't become a part of these statistics?
Yeah, I think it is being proactive and not waiting to the point where the doctor tells you, or you notice you don't fit your clothes anymore, you're feeling insecure, like not waiting for it to get that problem. being proactive and preventing it from starting. Because look, when the allopathic, when the medical system tells you that there's a problem, there's been a problem for years, right? And diabetes is the perfect example. By the time you become pre-diabetic, there was 5 years of stuff you could have already been doing to prevent that, right? And really, there's stuff before you could have been doing to prevent even that initial sign of insulin resistance, because it takes about insulin resistance 4 to 5 years to lead to pre-diabetes. Well, what about preventing you from even becoming insulin resistant, which you easily can do, because if you look at fasted insulin levels and C-peptide, you can see when insulin resistance starts. So if you actually look at that marker and you say, I'm going to check that marker every 6 months or a year, and the moment that starts going up, I need to get even more aggressive than what I'm doing now. But keeping it from rising means you need to be proactive now when you're here. And these are the tenets that we've already been talking about: reducing consumption of processed foods, incorporating fasting and longer rounds of fasting every single week. And you can decrease that maybe if you are at a normal healthy weight already, or maybe even underweight. You should still fast even if you're at a normal weight. You just don't do it as frequent, right? Getting on a solid resistance training program, getting on a good regimented supplement protocol that you're consistent with, and then optimizing your sleep. I have this, oh man, I can't wait. This hour-long video I'm going to be putting out on sleep, just all about the best, newest science-backed ways to optimize sleep, and then doing something to deal with your stress. And then I got to throw inflammation in there as this sort of wild card, because inflammation is important for everybody, but it becomes up there with 1, 2, and 3 if you are autoimmune, if you do have an inflammatory condition. So I think those are the tenets, those are the pillars. And but to boil it down, to answer your question again, being proactive and not waiting till you become sick to make these lifestyle changes is the most powerful thing anybody can do. And it's going to be basically free, other than buying the supplements and maybe paying for some coaching like with us to learn how to implement those things. But other than that, significantly less expensive.
Yeah.
And you'll maintain the highest level of highest quality of life you possibly can.
One of my old mentors said, "You'll be so damn happy tomorrow that you started today."
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that.
All right, thanks, my man.
We'll see you guys later. If you guys found this informative, then you're going to want to click this video right there. It's a continued explanation of what you learned today, guys. Knowledge is power, so let's keep this going. We'll see you later.